Hi, this is Pastor JC. Thanks so much for checking out our services today. I want to start by asking you a quick question. Have you ever been through hardship? Have you ever been through suffering? A few weeks ago when Pastor Russ asked, he's on vacation too, by the way, he and Janie, so let's be praying for them. They work so hard for you on a weekly basis. Let's pray that they have time away of respite and being able to enjoy each other and enjoy life. When he asked me if I would speak this weekend, I began thinking about what is it I'm going to talk about. School's back in session now. You know, we're still kind of in this pandemic era. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going on, but normally when I get up here and speak, I'm kind of the motivation guy. I like to talk about gratitude and personal development, obviously using the Bible, but I love to talk about those things. And so when he asked if I'd speak, I began thinking about that. What fun thing am I going to talk about that? But very quickly, as I begin to pray and think more and think about the season we're in, the pandemic, and all the things that we're still going through, the one word that kept coming to my mind was this word of suffering. Suffering. I said, oh, there's no way. I don't want to talk about that. That's not fun to talk about. That's not motivational to talk about. But the word kept coming back. And I don't want to talk about it. But then three things happened. And I want to share those three things with you before we jump into the message. On June 17th, I was woken up by a text message and by a dear friend of mine. And the text message read, Kevin McCook has passed away. Now, Kevin McCook, you don't know who he is, but I know who he is. A dynamic individual, 40 years of age. 3 beautiful boys, a beautiful wife, a dedicated husband, great golfer, successful businessman. I'm 42, he's 40. Passed away. He was diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago. I couldn't believe it. I teach at Point Loma Nazarene University, and one of the things we do on the very first class is I have them go around the screen because we're on Zoom still. So we go around the screen and I ask a couple questions, and one of those questions is, what challenges have you overcome in life, and what are you most proud of? And that night, on the first night we had the class, it was the first week of July, as we went around the Zoom screen. And I got to hear the stories of these students, and these are master's degree students. They're beautiful, they're successful, they're going after big things in life. And one of our students talked about how she and her husband lost one of their children to gun violence. And so now they're turning around and they're starting a nonprofit up there in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then the rest of the night we heard about anxiety and depression and more suffering. And then I thought, okay, maybe I'll talk about this idea of suffering, but I didn't want to do it. And then this past Sunday, I'm at SeaWorld with my daughter. We like to do that on Sunday nights. It's kind of our tradition. And so I'm there and we're enjoying the night. And my phone beeps. My phone goes off and I look down at the phone. It's from someone that I haven't heard from in a while. She actually used to attend this church for many years. She was, I wouldn't say she was a founding member, but she and her husband attended here for a long time. In 2020, she lost her husband. And just a week ago, she lost her only son, younger than 40, to cancer. I'll never forget that night, that Sunday night, and I'm walking around and I'm trying to enjoy it, SeaWorld with my daughter, but I just get this text message, and obviously I'm texting back, and I'm feeling really sorry for her. But as I'm driving home that night, it quickly dawned on me that we need to talk about this idea of suffering, and this is the first fill in the blank. Here's why we're talking about suffering tonight, and it's simply this. Everyone can relate to the challenge of suffering. Every person, you can and I can. And there are different forms of suffering: divorce, financial hardship, marriage hardship, problems with our kids, problems with our parents, health concerns, issues with anxiety and depression and mental health. And so here's what I know. Everyone, you and I, we all understand what suffering is. So today we were beginning a 2-week series entitled Overcoming. And this week we're looking at the following 5 questions. What is suffering? Is there value in the act of suffering? What is the purpose of suffering? How can I persevere through suffering? How can I consistently overcome suffering? So let's dive into the first question. What is suffering? I have 2 definitions that I want to give to you. First is a practical definition. Suffering is the state of undergoing pain, distress, or hardship. And you understand that. We all understand what suffering is. Now I want to give you the biblical definition. It's a little bit more complex. The Old Testament and the New Testament present 2 perspectives on human suffering. On the one hand, suffering is the consequence of the flawed nature of creation. We see that a lot in the Old Testament. Because of Adam and Eve's sin, God cursed the ground. Human beings can only stay alive through toil and hard work. The pain of childbirth increased for women because of that sin. Death and suffering entered into the world. If you know anything about the Old Testament, you know that when God first created the world with Adam and Eve, it was paradise. There was no suffering, there was no sin, and then they chose to make a decision against what God asked them to do, and because of that, suffering entered the world. On the other hand, a person suffering is the direct consequence of his or her violation of God's laws. Romans 3:23 says this, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." John 1:8 says this, "If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us." Romans 7:18 says, "For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out." And then Galatians 2:20 says this, "I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." Again, suffering is twofold. It's the flawed nature of our world because of sin, how sin entered the world, and it's also the consequence of stepping outside of God's law. So here's some examples. The flawed nature, right? So we have a flawed nature of our world. It's the reason why we have cancer and disease and mental health issues and oppression and racism, lack of equality, COVID-19, all of this, global wars, pandemics, all of this is because we live in a fallen and broken world. But then we also have man's sin, and you understand that. Anytime you step outside of God's law, and if you want to know what that is, go back to Exodus and look at the 10 Commandments. Anytime we break one of those and we step outside of what God has for us, God's best for us, there is suffering. There's always consequences to our sin. So now let's move on to the next question. Is there value in suffering? So we looked at what is suffering. Let's ask the question, is there value in suffering? So here's what I want to do. I want to look at 6 different viewpoints on suffering based on 6 major world religions. Now, here's what I want to do, okay? I was a religion major in college, my undergrad, and so I'm fascinated with this. A few weeks ago, I was thinking about this idea of suffering, and I said, well, what does religion, just all religion, have to say about this? Now, here's what I want to tell you, okay? Please don't email me or email Pastor Russ and say, hey, Pastor JC's up there, and he's talking to us about Buddhism and Islam, and he's trying to convert us. That's not what's happening. Okay? But there's a very important point that I want to make, but in order to make this point, I've got to walk us through these 6 different religions and what they each say about religion. So this is more descriptive than it is prescriptive. So hang on with me, all right? So we're going to move through this, pretty quickly here as we look through these 6 different religions and what they say about suffering. So let's look at the Jewish religion and what they say. Suffering is merely a characteristic of physical existence, right? So because you exist, you will experience suffering. Individual suffering can only be understood as alienation or separation from good. Suffering is not to be accepted, but always calls for a response in this world. I have friends of mine who are Jewish, and so we talk about this. I actually work with one of them, and so we have a lot of religious conversations. He knows that I'm an evangelical Christian, and he's Jewish, and they don't have a belief in heaven. So when they talk about this idea of suffering, it's always, hey, we have to figure out the solution in this world because there is no heaven, right? We believe as evangelical Christians that there is a heaven to look forward to. They don't have that same belief. So here's the Jewish perspective on suffering in summary. There is no inherent value in suffering, but there must be a drive to alleviate and eliminate suffering in the here and now. Let's look at the Christian Roman Catholic view of suffering. Here's what they would say. Without pain, we would be ill-equipped to know when our bodies were encountering a potential threat, right? So example is if you put your hand too close to a fire, you're cooking in the kitchen, and if you didn't have that feeling of pain, then you would burn your hand off. You burn both hands off, right? So we're lucky that we're able to feel suffering. They would also say that suffering is a state of disharmony with ourselves, with others, with the Creator, due to illness, due to wrongdoing. And so here's kind of the Roman Catholic perspective on suffering in summary. Christ's life was characterized by massive suffering. Christians are called upon to continue Christ's redemptive work. The act of suffering, while not particularly valuable, is not meaningless. It is particular to share in Christ's work in the world, to continue the work of bringing harmony between God and man. Let's now move on to the Buddhist perspective on suffering. And here's a quote by the Buddha. He says this, "I teach one thing and one thing only. suffering and the end of suffering. This entire religion of Buddhism was founded on this idea of suffering and how to eliminate it. They have what is called four noble truths, and here are the four noble truths. Suffering exists. Suffering arises as the result of causes. Suffering can be eliminated. The way to eliminate suffering, according to the Buddhist tradition, is through the right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right effort, right livelihood, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So here's a quote on Buddhism and suffering. Accepting the fact that pain is an intrinsic part of being alive, rather than resenting suffering, helps us dispel these added sufferings. Pain is inevitable. The stories we weave about pain are optional. That's what they'd say. So here's the Buddhist perspective on suffering in summary. There is no value to the act of suffering. However, suffering can be the greatest of teachers. Let's look at the Islamic perspective on suffering. They have a term called inshallah. And I have some Muslim friends here in San Diego County, and anytime I meet with them and we have conversations, we'll say something like, hey, next time, let's get together for dinner. I can't wait to meet at your home, or, we'll have and they'll follow that statement by inshallah. And what they mean is God willing. This expresses the belief that nothing happens unless God wills it, and God's will supersedes human will. So here's what they would say. Suffering or affliction are caused by events that lead to some form of harm or loss. These events and the suffering they cause are often discussed in the light of the belief, again, of the omnipotent and omniscient, so that's all-powerful, all-knowing God. So the same sense of suffering occurs as a consequence of God's permission. It's captured by that same expression that we just said. Inshallah, it happened with God's permission. So here's the Islamic perspective on suffering in summary. While there is no inherent value to the act of suffering, it can only happen because God willed it to happen. Suffering must be solved, but it also must be respected. Let's move to the Hindu perspective on suffering. Now, if you know anything about the Hindu traditions, you've heard about this idea of karma. Karma is this. It's the belief that one's actions in their earlier lives affect one's rebirth and the events that are to occur in one's future life. Therefore, suffering is inextricably linked to one's actions, right? So here's another thing that they believe about suffering. While Hindus may act in ways to mitigate this suffering, both in the immediate and the long term, there is a degree to which Hindus accept and even embrace its inevitability. So here's what they think about it. If suffering happens, it's because of something I did. So if I relieve suffering, if I alleviate the suffering, then I'm going to have to continue to suffer longer because this is karma. So many Hindus would believe if I'm suffering, it's my fault, so I have to continue it. I'm not going to alleviate the suffering. So again, the Hindu perspective on suffering in summary, there is no inherent value to the act of suffering. However, choices you made earlier in life or in an earlier life have caused the pain that you're now enduring. To do away with suffering could prolong the current suffering. Now let's look at what we understand to be suffering is the Christian evangelical view on suffering. And here's what it has to say. There is no inherent value in suffering. Human suffering is a perversion and a disruption of what should be. There exists a dislocation of the relationship between human beings and their creator. Human suffering is a sign that something is not right with things as they stand. This sign prompts a search for God. So evangelicals certainly believe that human suffering should be prevented, right, and relieved wherever possible. And this means finding ways to alleviate suffering in ways that are ethical. So if you study the evangelical church, and we have a lot to be proud of, if you study our history, you go all the way back, you will see that Christians have been on the forefront of the development of medicine, hospice care for the sick and the suffering, mental health issues. We're hearing a lot about that now and how churches are helping people with mental health, foster care, education, right? So the evangelical perspective on suffering in summary is this. There is no inherent value in the act of suffering. However, suffering can jumpstart a person's search for God and can be used by God to achieve the plans he has. So here's the million-dollar question. Is there value in the act of suffering? I did all of that to give you this answer, and the answer is no. Based on all of the world's major religions, including Christianity, there is no inherent value in the act of suffering. And when I say the act of suffering, I mean the very act of it. If I hit myself on the hand, that act right there, the pain I'm feeling right now on both hands, There's no value in that. Now, what could happen is a lesson, and we'll talk about that here in a second, where I say, well, that hurt, right? So I'm never going to hit my hand like that again, right? So here's what I want you to know. When people try to tell you when you're going through suffering, because people are always trying to help, and they say things and they don't understand what they're saying, they're just trying to be helpful, and they'll come up to you in the middle of a divorce, or you've lost somebody who's special to you through death, or you just got the news that you didn't want to get from the doctor, and they'll come up and they're trying to help you, and they'll say something like, there's a reason why you're going through this. Here's what I want you to know. And this is hard for us to hear, and we're going to get here in just a second, so stay with me. But here's what I want you to know. No, there's not. No, there's not. When you're going through that act of suffering, there's actually no reason for it. It's important for me to stress that there is no value in the very act of suffering. So I can hear you asking me right now. I can hear you through the screen, and you're asking, well, if there's no value in the act of suffering, then what's the purpose of suffering? Watch this. Watch this. While there is no inherent value in the act of suffering, from a biblical perspective, suffering can serve the greater good of producing perseverance in the life of the believer. These next two scriptures are not on the screen here, but I want to read them for you because I think this is very important for you to hear. James 1, 2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Romans 5, 3-4 says this, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Now, this may be one of the most important things I say to you, so I want you to stay focused on what I'm getting ready to say to you. This is very important. It is important for you to understand this. God does not create suffering, but he does allow it. Going all the way back to Adam and Eve, man brought suffering into the world through sinful actions. Adam and Eve lived in paradise. There was no sin. There was no brokenness until man, Adam and Eve, did what God asked them not to do. So, of course, an all-powerful and all-knowing God could rid the world of suffering if he deemed it necessary. But God created man, you and me, with free will. And here's the deal. Man is broken. The world is broken. As long as man is broken and lives and we live in a broken and fallen world, there will be suffering. It is a fact of life. And you and I have to accept that fact. As hard as it may be, we have to accept that there will be suffering. However, God has chosen to allow suffering to create the benefit of producing perseverance, which then produces hope. Now, how does perseverance produce hope? Watch this. The more we persevere, the more we come to see what God has done in our lives, and the more we come to trust God. The more we trust God, the greater our hope becomes. The greater our hope becomes based on trusting God, the greater his name becomes. So I want you to see this. While suffering has no value and is not created by an evil and deviant God, he can use the aftermath of suffering to turn the world towards himself, the good, loving, and ultimate Father. So is there value in the very act of suffering? No. Is there purpose that can come from suffering? Yes. So we've asked the questions, what is suffering? Is there value in the act of suffering? What is the purpose of suffering? Now let's turn our attention to see what we can do while we are facing suffering, because here's the deal, we're all going to face it. And it's hard for us to hear there's no inherent value in the act of suffering. So then we're asking, well, what do we do with it? Because we're all going to face suffering. Some of you are in it right now, and I want to give you tools that you can use right now if you're facing suffering. So here's the question I want us to ask. How can we persevere through suffering? Now, when looking at this, I want to look at two examples from the life of Jesus. I shared with you that back in my undergrad, I did most of my studying in world religions at a public university. And I remember I took a class with a guy by the name of Scott Barchi. Brilliant. He has a PhD from Harvard. He taught at Harvard. He's a New Testament scholar. He's got a Wikipedia page. You can Google him. I got to take several classes with him, and I got to sit at his feet as kind of a mentee for a while, and I got to learn from him. Now, Professor Scott Barchi, was an atheist, or an agnostic. He didn't believe in the miracles of Jesus. He didn't believe in the resurrection, the virgin birth. So in his classes, he took all of that out, and he said, what we're going to do is strip Jesus naked and look at him as a bare man. And I will tell you this. During that time, I was going through my own crisis of faith, trying to figure out who Jesus is and what he means to me. And I remember taking this man's class, and that spent me out in all kinds of different directions. But I'll never forget what brought me back to Jesus was studying him as a man. Because here's what we believe, that God was fully man and fully God, right? So he understood, he felt what you and I felt at the same time he was God. What we're getting ready to read right next is really what brought me back into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Watching Jesus as a man do what he did, deal with what he dealt with. Persevere through what he had to go through for your sins and for mine. So watch this. 5 things we're going to talk about here, what you can do, modeling the life of Jesus, what you can do with suffering. So take a journey with me. Let's go back to the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus had just had the Last Supper. He knows what's getting ready to happen because he's fully God, fully man. So he knows that the trying hour is getting ready to come up. Watch this. Matthew 26, 36 to 46. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. The first step when you're faced with suffering, when suffering hits you, the first step, connect with others. Jesus did that right away. He knew what was getting ready to come, and what did he do? He didn't go off by himself. He didn't run away. He connected with his disciples. And here's the deal. Jesus had been with these disciples for 3 years. So this wasn't some kind of a new relationship where he found, hey guys, I'm getting ready to be crucified. Something horrible is getting ready to happen. Let me go find some friends. No, he found them for 3 years. He had these friends. We talk about this a lot here at New Hope, the importance of you being in a small group. Be proactive in building strong relationships, because here's the deal. You are going to go through suffering. I'm going to go through it. We're all going to go through it. We need to have people who are near us when we go through it. Let's continue to move on. Verse 39a, going a little further. He fell with his face to the ground and he prayed. Here's the second step when faced with suffering. Communicate with God. So you connect with others and then you communicate with God. Now, how do we do this as people? It says that Jesus here, he fell with his face to the ground and he prayed. He prayed to God. So what do? Prayer. Number 1, and Bible reading. Those are the 2 ways. A lot of times we love to pray and we love to have communication with God, but sometimes we forget that one of the best ways to have communication with God is through reading the Bible. And if you're going through a hard time, pick up the Psalms. David knew how to, David knew of all the people in the Bible that knew what it felt like to feel sorrow and pain. We just came through an entire series about David. He understood what it was like to feel pain. Read through the Psalms. Read what he has to say. Read his pain. Let's move on. Verse 39b, my Father, if it is possible, he prays this, he's continuing to pray, if it is possible, okay, he knows what's getting ready to happen, he's going to have to give up his life for your sins and for mine. He says, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, and then watch what he says, yet not as I will, but as you will. So here's the third step when you're faced with suffering, concede to God. And so here's what I mean by that, surrender. This is the hardest thing, and again, this is not a fun message to give because it's not uppity, and it's one of the, and so what you're saying right now is you're telling me, JC, that when I'm going through divorce, I just got the news that my husband walked out, I just got the news that my wife walked out, I'm supposed to just surrender to God in that moment? You're telling me when I walk away from the doctor's office, and I got that note from the doctor, and I got the news I didn't want to hear, I'm supposed to concede? You're telling me when I lost my parent, I lost my child, all of that, I'm supposed to surrender? I'm telling you that this is what Jesus did. This is what Jesus did. And so if we want to take a lesson from what he did in that moment, the very thing that we can do is the thing we don't want to do, and that's to say, God, your will. And this is what he's saying. And he begs, he said, look, take this away from me if possible. I don't want this. You may be going through something right now. It's okay to pray that. God, I don't want to have to go through this. But then he follows that up by saying, yet not my will, but yours be done. And that's the prayer that we have to pray as well. Let's move forward. He concedes to God. Verse 40, then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. He says it again, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. 3 times he says this, God, please take this away. I don't want this. But your will, not my will, be done. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let's go. Here comes my betrayer. Let's move into the actual death of Jesus. So he's taken before Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate releases Barabbas. There's a whole story, and you can read about this in the Gospels. And then Jesus finds himself. He's carrying the cross. He's up on Golgotha. He's now arms spread wide, and he's on the cross. And watch this, Matthew 27:45-46. You want to know what we have to do during suffering? Watch this. Here's the death of Jesus. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came all over the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? The 4th step when you're faced with suffering, courageously confess your truth to God. Get radically truthful and transparent with God. He can take it. Here's Jesus Christ, and this is what I want you to know. Jesus felt abandoned by his own Father. Jesus felt left out. This is his daddy. And he felt like, my dad has walked away from me. My dad has rejected me. Jesus felt that. Of course you and I are going to feel that. And here's the thing. Sometimes when we go through it, we try to act all pious and all churchy. And so we don't say what we really want to say. But what this scripture is trying to tell us is here, be honest with your suffering. Say, God, why in the world have you forsaken me? Why are you allowing me to go through this divorce? Why this financial problem? Why did I lose my job that way? And now I can't provide for my kids the way I want to. Why is my whole world being upended because of COVID and a global pandemic? Why? You can ask God these questions. And then here's what I would say. Get radically truthful with yourself and with others, especially when you have done the sin. So again, there are times that you get the news from the doctor's office. That's not your fault. That's the brokenness of the world. But if you've sinned and you've caused pain to somebody else, then in those moments of suffering that you will have because of the consequences of your sin, get truthful with yourself. And get truthful with others and say, you know what, I'm sorry for what I did. Be radically truthful, radically transparent in your suffering. Let's move to the 5th thing. Luke 23:46, Jesus called out. So after this was done, Jesus calls out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he breathed his last and he died. So here's the 5th and final step when faced with suffering. Commit yourself to God. It's one of the hardest things, full and complete dedication to God in the middle of suffering. This is the hardest thing that you will ever have to do. When you feel like turning your back and running from God, this is the moment you must turn towards God and recommit your life to Him. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. You're telling me when I go through a divorce, God's taken away my family, I'm supposed to recommit? Come on now. You're telling me I'm going through financial problems, I'm supposed to recommit my life to God? Come on now. But this is what Jesus did. I'm not telling you what I think I would do. I don't want to preach this. I don't want to teach this because this is hard. But this is what Jesus did. So what does that look like? Diving into prayer, diving into the Bible, diving into your small group, diving into the life of the church. So we talked about this: connect with others, communicate with God, concede to God, courageously confess your truth to God, commit yourself fully to God. And what's the last question? How can I consistently overcome suffering? We're out of time. And so next week, we're going to talk about this, the process of resilience. Brooke Price is going to join me on the stage, and we're going to talk about how to consistently overcome suffering. Let's pray. God, be with the people as they watch this video. If anyone is suffering, I pray that these words would get into them and that they would be able to walk away from this video with tools on how to suffer better. God, we thank you. We know that you're the ultimate Father. You're there for us every step of the way. We love you today. In Jesus' name, amen.